In this autobiographical poem, Origin Story, Eve L. Ewing looks at the beginnings of her own life, beginning with her parents. She recounts various aspects of her mother and father's lives as young adults and how they met. She goes on to explore the nature of love and, more specifically, her parents' love, comparing this to a comic book that is enjoyed at the time, but thought of as disposable and not meant to last. So let's look at the title and the first line. This is true. So in the comic superhero world, an origin story refers to the backstory of how a superhero gains their superpowers. So we can read this as an immediate display of a pride in herself and her own talents and powers, so to speak, as a modern black woman. And that whole first stanza is about little nuanced things about her parents and how just one small thing, the selling of a comic book, led to her existence. Look closely at the adjectives and description of her parents in that first stanza. They were both clearly young and independent, with their own implied strained relationships with their families, having left home at 19 for her mother and 17 for her father. They're both freelance, transient creatives, and Ewing perhaps indicates a real naivety and lack of stability with her young parents, making it quite understandable that by the end of this poem we realise that their relationship was ill-fated and it doesn't go any further. In the second stanza, she goes on to describe love and relationships using the simile of a comic book, first of all. And if you think of a comic book, it's dramatic, colourful, fun image, in terms of the content. But it's a story shared with us on paper. Paper is fragile, which she says there. Look at the means in which she talks about protecting it. She talks about plastic and cardboard boxes and dark rooms. These are protective measures and materials. Then the word might here is interesting because she's really talking about how much hard work goes into a relationship. And if you do all of this, so if you protect it in all those ways, then it might have a chance at survival. But if you don't, it doesn't work, which is what happened to her parents. It never saw polyvinyl, which is a plastic covering. It was curled up in a pocket, which is really a metaphor for a lack of care and a loss of concern and intimacy. When comics started to become valuable, collectors understood that they needed to preserve them to last a long time. And so when you compare that to this relationship, it wasn't deemed valuable. Her parents didn't ultimately deem that as a valuable thing, is what she's saying. I love the difference between putting the comic book, the love, in a dark room versus reading it under the covers, which she says here. And there's a really subtle distinction between protection in a dark room and just hiding away. Maybe the relationship there was forbidden or improper. And there's such a long list here of a long list at the end of Stanza 2 that's just proof of how poorly that love was maintained. Lent to a friend, memorised, mishandled, worn thin. However, the good ending of this will always be her. And even though her origin story isn't this tale of a perfect union that lasts forever, it is still her pride and her power. And it was a love that was enjoyed at the time, like the comics, and not meant to last, but the stories that are captured within are the lasting thing. She, Eve L. Ewing, she is the product of this. So finally, in terms of the structure, the poem is written with no regular rhythm or rhyme, and in a way that seems like she's telling an oral story. She's letting us into her personal space with quite a conversational tone, which is reinforced by the enjumpment throughout. Phrases like all sleeveless and all thick glass. The lines that begin with and but. And even that penultimate line of the first stanza where it's almost as if she's handing us or pointing at a comic book like this one. So ultimately, this poem is about the comparison of a comic book to her parents' relationship, something that's enjoyed at the time, but disposable and not meant to last.